According to NFL Communications, on average, an audience of 8.4 million viewers viewed the 2020 NFL Draft all 3 days across ESPN, ESPN Deportes, the NFL Network, ABC, and all other digital platforms, easily surpassing the 2019 mark of 6.2 million viewers by an average of 35%. And my friends, the NFL is gearing up to give us the NFL Draft once again, with it right around the corner. It's time to get our minds right and give you an in-depth preview. For that, I turned to veteran sports journalist and executive producer of Backpack Broadcasting, Dexter Henry, who stopped by the program this week to give his insights and perspectives on this latest edition of the culmination of the NFL Draft evaluation process. We even found some time to dabble in a little NBA discussion as well. It's a full-service sports talk soup on this edition of Let's Have This Conversation. I'm Kevin McShann, and let's indeed have this conversation. Dexter, if you're ready, I welcome you to the program, and I'm excited to preview the NFL Draft with you tonight. So great to see you, and thank you so very much for being here.
Thanks, man. So glad to be here. I really appreciate it, Kevin. Good to see you.
With the NFL Draft less than 10 days away, we began our discussion by debating what has Henry most excited and intrigued about the latest incarnation of Christmas in April for the NFL?
I think, that's a good question, Kevin, because I think that everybody, knows Trevor Lawrence. We know he's going number 1 to Jacksonville. That's understood. So, the clock really starts with the Jets, right? What will the Jets do at number 2? You've heard a lot of talk about Zach Wilson. Just whether him or Justin Fields. You also have Mac Jones. He's been in the conversation. So I really think is what's the next quarterback to go? Because will it be the Jets at number 2? They've said they're going to take a quarterback. I think Justin Fields has kind of been disrespected here, Kevin. And I think he would actually be a very interesting fit for the Jets. But there's a lot of good options. So that's one thing I'm definitely looking at. I'm also looking at who might be aggressive in terms of moving up. In terms of to get talent that they might need. Would it be a team like Carolina, who's now at 8? Would they look to move up? The Broncos, these are teams that don't necessarily have some stability at quarterback and need sort of an infusion of talent. Even Dallas or the Giants sitting at 11. I think all that is very interesting. I think that's the other thing to look at. Number 2, and I guess once you always look at the people moving up, Kevin, you also want to look at, will anybody trade back? Would a team like Miami, who may think they have their quarterback in Tua, and they're now selected to pick 6th, would they want to move back and try to get some more talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball, to build things up? I think it's how much activity is there going to be on draft day. That's always interesting, especially after you see the first couple of dominoes fall. I think after you see what the Jets do, and then maybe when you see what the Niners do at 3, it'll be very interesting to see what else happens after that.
Yes, this draft is admittedly offensive heavy with a lot of talented skill players. However, I was curious to note Henry's response to the other positions he'll be keeping an eye on as the end of April rolls around.
Yeah, I think I always think for teams, offensive line help is something that a lot of teams always need. So you're looking, like you said, it's easy to always look at quarterbacks and wide receivers. They make the big highlight plays, what we like to see. I think offensive line and also there's some tight ends in this draft that can be very interesting, and we know how that can sort of be a security blanket for a lot of quarterbacks. Kyle Pitts projected to go in the top 10. A lot of mock drafts have him going towards Atlanta. So he can be very interesting. There as well. The Giants, the team are looking for offensive line help. Heard a lot of that buzz here in New York. Rashawn Slater is somebody they could go after. Christian Darrisaw. So there's some options. I always think teams looking to shore up either the offensive line for protection for their quarterbacks, or also even looking at the defensive line. Even though this draft is way more offensive heavy, as you said, Kevin, it should be interesting. So if you're looking at stuff and bolstering your offense, the one thing you want to do always is to protect your quarterback, right? You want to make sure he's upright and protect him. So getting that protection and being able to win the battle in the trenches, which is kind of cliche, is what you want to do. So definitely look out for some offensive linemen here. Don't sleep on that and sleep on teams who might be looking for value to get value on the offensive line, even in terms of trading back.
When we look at the player with the highest ceiling in the draft, who do you think has the highest ceiling of all these prospects this year, Bunny?
Oh man, I mean, it's hard to not say Trevor Lawrence, right? Like he's looked so good at Clemson the last 3 years. It's hard to not say that it's him. I mean, every he looks like he should be a Hall of Famer. But we've seen crazier things happen in the draft. I think Jalen Waddle also has a really high upside here too out of Alabama. My concern sometimes just with Alabama wide receivers though is that they haven't necessarily played with really great quarterbacks, and they just always they're always open. So I'm not necessarily sure how good the quarterbacks are, sometimes how good the wide receivers are. But I like the upside of Justin Fields, man. I like Justin Fields. I've seen some projection of him going to your Lions, Kevin. I've seen that. And I think the upside around him is better. A lot of people are looking what he can't do, but I think that he can have an impact sort of the way Deshaun Watson was underrated in terms of where he was picked a couple of years ago. I'm not saying he's as good, but I think people are undervaluing the impact he might be able to have on the NFL level. But if I had to go with just highest ceiling, yeah, it's Trevor Lawrence from everything I've seen from him in college. Looks like a guy who can make all the throws, lead an offense. I mean, look, we have to see all those things once he gets on the field in the NFL. But from what I've seen in college, I would give him the highest ceiling for sure.
Conversely, which prospect or prospects do you believe has been pulling above their weight and may be just a tad overrated throughout the duration of the evaluation process?
Yeah, the one for me, the concern with a guy I think might be a little bit overrated here is Mac Jones. I'm not as high on him as some other people, and there's some projections that have him going either to. Now I think he's going. Now it's funny if you ask me, do I think San Francisco will take them? The answer is yes, Kevin. I think they will, and they're very desperate for a quarterback. I actually think they're better off probably taking Fields, but I don't think they'll do that. I think they will take Mac Jones. Um, I just think that and they've been kind of quiet on what they're going to do exactly there. But I think that Mac Jones, a lot of his draft stock rose up late. Recently in the last couple of months, he's kind of shot up the boards. Same with Zach Wilson as well too. With those guys, I just there's a lot of uncertainty there, and I don't see a guy that can I don't feel as confident in him. But look, the NFL draft is a crapshoot, as you know, Kevin. You never know with any of these picks. We can say we like a guy here, and nothing's guaranteed, and we don't know. I'm just not as sold on him as some others are as well too. And I could probably even add Zach Wilson to that as well too. I mean, I think he's a safer bet than Mac Jones, but I'm not as really as high on either of those two guys.
And when we look at just the moving of the draft outside of New York, I'm wondering your thoughts on the draft on location and the impact it's had on the league, Bud.
Yeah, you know what's funny? As a native New Yorker, as somebody who's covered the draft a couple of times in New York, I believe 3 or 4 times I've actually covered the draft, and it's a great experience to be around. I think it's nice that it's getting to go to other cities, and other fans in those areas are getting to experience what the NFL draft is coming to their city. Now, I'm sure for the players coming, I'm sure the players love coming to New York because New York's great, and night out in the town and the glitz and the glamour and all that. I'm sure they loved all that. But I think it's nice to spread the wealth around and try something different. And I thought it was a good move from the NFL. I wonder if there's ever a point they'll move it back consistently to New York. I don't know if that'll happen, Kevin, but I think it's a good move. I think it's been solid. Don't mind it at all.
Well, I don't think they'll move it back permanently to New York because it's a moneymaker for the league if they move it around,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, and follow the money, right? You always got to follow the money. I hear you.
Absolutely. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on which team you think has to have a successful draft, or who's under the most pressure to have a successful draft this year.
That's a really good question. Who's under the pressure to have the most successful draft? I'm going to put the Jets up there because they really haven't had a really, really stellar draft in years. And they've had some good picks and they've traded some of those guys away, but they haven't really had a stellar draft. So I think there's a lot of pressure on them. I think there's a lot of pressure on San Francisco to get the right quarterback in here. They have the talent of a team that can win now. They need to get a guy in here that can lead them and do that as well. I also would say I think there's some pressure on a team like the Broncos as well. They sort of need to get things right on that end. They're kind of looking like they can break through. And then, I wouldn't say this is a high pressure team, but this has been an interesting offseason thus far for the New England Patriots. And I think how they draft in this draft and being able to restock as they've already improved the defensive side of the ball, but can they also add some other offensive pieces and looking towards the future? They need a quarterback of the future. What's going to happen? What's going to happen for the team post Cam Newton? They have to start thinking about that. Another team I'll add to there, I don't know if the pressure is on them necessarily, but the Pittsburgh Steelers, they also have to start thinking about their future, especially at quarterback with Ben Roethlisberger getting up in there in the age and sort of retooling their team and looking at that. So I think teams with aging quarterbacks, you could also add the Falcons in there as well with Matt Ryan, the Packers. I think those teams are now sort of in these positions where they have to actually start thinking a little bit about what their window is in the next 2 to 3 years, if they even have one, and how are they going to retool, especially at the quarterback position.
And you're in the epicenter in New York with the Jets and the Giants. I would love to get your thoughts on that, and as well, as you know, you're being broadcast today in Windsor, which is the city right across the river from Detroit. So I have to ask you, what do you think the Lions are going to do in the draft as well?
Well, yeah, I've seen the Lions. Well, right now, it all depends on how you feel about Jared Goff, right? Do you think he's a quarterback that can take you to the future? Did you like what you saw out of him in L.A.? I would think the Lions need to add a quarterback at some point. I don't know if they have to do that in the first round. Looks like Justin Fields might be there for them. That could be interesting. But I think the Lions need to find the guy they're going to go with long term following the departure of Matthew Stafford. And I think that's going to be the most glaring need for them going forward. Until they find that guy, they're not going to really be able to move that franchise forward. Personally, Kevin, I'm sorry. I do not believe in Jared Goff as that guy for you. I see your face. You don't believe in him either, probably. But I think that's something they need to do. As far as the Giants and the Jets, I'll start with the Giants first. I think the Giants, for them, the big thing is, okay, can we protect Daniel Jones? Can we limit the mistakes and make the offensive line better than it was for him? We saw some improvement with that last year. We saw a bit of a culture change with the Giants. Joe Judge seems to have started that shift, but I think protection for Daniel Jones is imperative, and also opening up some running holes for Saquon Barkley if he's able to come back and be effective after that torn ACL. So I think beefing up the line is definitely imperative for the Giants, as well as also making some improvements possibly in the secondary on defense for them as well. I think those are two areas they definitely like to show up. As far as the Jets, look, the Jets need talent everywhere. But first of all, they need a quarterback. Absolutely, you have to get a quarterback in here that you believe can be the franchise. The Jets, in my lifetime, have never hit on that. They've never had a franchise quarterback pretty much since Joe Willie Namath. That is the imperative. If they get that right, that's a huge win in this draft for the Jets. So number one is they got to get a quarterback. If they can do that, they'll be in pretty good shape.
And as a Jets fan, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the new head coach and what you think of him, Bud.
I like that. I think it's going to have a lot to do. I like his defensive background, but I think a lot's going to have to deal with how the decisions are made down to drafting, and does he get the right players that he wants in here that fits his scheme, that fits the mindset. What we've seen in the history of the Jets is it always will seem like they never have a head coach or general manager that is sort of on the same page and working in sync together. And I think that's going to be the key there. And I think where Jets fans have a lot of trepidation is, all right, we've had some coaches come in and they've been good and we've had some limited success, but can we have sustainable success? And also, will the front office and ownership, believe in that coach, even if there's a 6-10 season 2 years from now or something? Will they stick with that? I think consistency is one of the things that you don't see enough of in the NFL, and I hope they can stick to a coach and GM and stick it through the tough times. So I think he can do a good job in turning it around, but I think he'll only be as good as how management and ownership allows him to be.
And we saw today, of course, Alex Smith announced his retirement, so I'm curious to get your thoughts on the arc of his career and what he meant to the league.
Well, Alex Smith was a gamer. He was a quarterback that was looked early on as a game manager in his years with the Niners, and then he had some good years with the Chiefs, and obviously, breaking his leg and unfortunately his career with the Washington football team, very disappointing. But to see him come back last season, that was nice. That warmed the hearts of everybody, Kevin. It was nice to see him back on the field. And I think that's a lot of what he'll be remembered for, how he fought to come back and compete. And, it's a shame he's not able to compete anymore. But I think, he was a very good quarterback in a short period of time. And, seeing what he came back from and his resiliency, that should definitely inspire a lot of people and a lot of football fans across the world.
And just very quickly, I know that your other passion is covering basketball, and I know that you've got a podcast dedicated to that. So I'm going to ask you to tell me about your podcast and what you think of the NBA as we round the corner within the last 20 or so games, buddy.
So my podcast is Ain't Hard to Tell podcast. I host that with my co-host Brian Fonseca. We talk a lot about sports and a little hip hop as well too. But a very strong focus on the NBA. NBA is my favorite league, favorite sport. As far as this season, man, Kevin, this has been a crazy season with everything has gone on in the world with COVID, right? It's just been a insane season, hard to predict, hard to know what's going on. But we're coming down the stretch, last 20 to 15 games for a lot of teams. And I think what is going to be the interesting as we head into the playoffs is who's healthy. I mean, a lot of it comes down to health many times, but how healthy teams are this year and how healthy they can be throughout a postseason run. And yes, that includes, having teammates or team members or people around the team possibly not contract COVID. Hopefully that'll lessen as more people get vaccinated, but that's going to be the key. That's the thing I'm keeping my eye on, especially the Lakers. Can the Lakers get healthy? Can LeBron returning, Anthony Davis returning? How do they get back into gear? Are they going to be fine? Are the Brooklyn Nets going to be healthy? They've had a lot of injuries they've dealt with despite their good record. Are the Philadelphia 76ers for real now with Doc Rivers coaching them? So a lot of interesting questions. But I think no matter what your biggest question is, it all has to come back to health with the NBA. And it wouldn't shock me if the healthiest team, maybe not necessarily the best team, is a team that could be holding up the Larry O'Brien Trophy in 2021.
Absolutely. And, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the Phoenix Suns because I think they're one of the most intriguing teams so far this year.
Yeah, I do think they're one of the most intriguing teams in the league because I think nobody had them as high as being where they are now in the Western Conference, right? Where they're second place in the West. I think a lot of people, including myself, thought they'd have a great impact. Chris Paul would have a great impact on that team. I saw them probably being in the middle of the Western Conference playoff race, but they're high as 2 right now. They play a very slower pace, but you can see the impact Chris Paul's had on his team. He had a great impact, obviously, in Oklahoma City last year, and he's showing it again at his age, just running the team, has everybody in the right spots. DeAndre Ayton's developing into a nice player. Devin Booker's game has gone to another level. Mikal Bridges has been really good. So they're a really dangerous team. I think they're a team not to be taken lightly with the leadership of Chris Paul. And they're a team definitely on the rise. And I'm really intrigued to see what they can do in the playoffs. Can they win a round or even more? But they've also been one of the healthier teams. So if they stay that course, it wouldn't shock me if they got to a conference finals. I wouldn't be shocked at all.
Absolutely. So my final question for you, Dexter, is how can people get connected with you if they're so inclined to do that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. If people want to connect with me, you can follow me on all social media platforms at DHenryTV. You can also follow my podcast, Ain't Hard to Tell Podcast. That's at AHTT Podcast. You can follow me there. And you can also check out my YouTube channel for my production company, Backpack Broadcasting. So check us out there.
Fantastic. Hey, Dexter, I always enjoy and relish the opportunity to talk some sports and the NFL draft in particular. So I really want to thank you for spending a few minutes with me to get us up to date on everything we need to know about the NFL draft and the NBA as well. Your time and expertise are most appreciated. Great to see you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you, man.